evening, everybody. I'm Jonathan Fitch, and this is a meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals of Sherborn. With me tonight are Todd Labey and Rick Novak is on the phone. We are going to proceed, and Rick might be joining us by video, but for the time being, I'm going to run this meeting. Are there any other boards or committees that would like to come to order?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. This is Jeff Walter from the Select Board, but we actually didn't post a meeting for tonight, so I don't think we'll come to order, but we'll not deliberate. We'll just listen. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Anybody here from other committees? Would like to?
I can't see anybody.
I see Mr. Lesser. And okay, well, we then will proceed accordingly. There's nobody else wants to bring a meeting to order. A number of documents have been filed on the public file regarding this, the continuation of the Washington Street Sherborn Homes LLC application for a comprehensive permit pursuant to Mass Gen Laws Chapter 40B. I'd like to begin by asking the applicant, Mr. Murchison, what he would like to do with the agenda tonight.
I think it was previously discussed with Rick that we would present on both traffic and on the public water supply. We're happy to talk about other issues tonight. I will say that there's been no reaction from the peer reviewer yet, which is perfectly appropriate, but so therefore it's probably premature to spend a lot of time on that, but certainly if the public had questions, we'd be happy to take them. I did not ask the engineers to join because I didn't think we'd be getting much into that, but certainly anything highly technical I will defer, but obviously I'm somewhat knowledgeable on the basics and probably could answer questions for folks tonight. But our intent was to give about a 15-minute presentation on traffic and a 15-minute presentation on a public water supply. Obviously, public water supply is something that came up a lot in one of the other hearings. And this time it is our desire to build a public water supply. We certainly can, we'll present on that and then take questions on those two topics, if that works for you, Jonathan.
Sure, very good. Well, do you want to begin then with your 15-minute presentation on traffic?
Sure. You want to start with traffic? Happy to do that.
Okay.
So traffic is Jeff. There he is, Jeffrey Dirk. And Jeffrey, do you want to share your screen or would you prefer Jeannie to put up your slides? What's your preference tonight? And you're muted at the moment.
Yeah, just trying to find the button there. It doesn't matter to me, whatever is easier for the board. I can certainly share my screen. If you want, I can do that, and that way I can control the slides.
Sure.
Okay. Sure, if you can do that, that'd be helpful.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. And I will just see if I can get the full screen mode there. There we go. And I apologize. By way of introduction, my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm the managing partner with Vanessa & Associates. And as Bob had introduced, we're the transportation consultants for the project. So I'm going to try to keep this to 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Go through these. Yeah, go through these as quickly as possible. Obviously, a lot of detail as it relates to the transportation assessment. And I also heard that your peer reviewer hasn't had a chance to react to the documents. So I'll go through the technical things, but I fully expect your peer reviewer will do a thorough job as they always do and provide feedback to you, and will respond to any comments that the peer reviewer may have.
Jeffrey, let me just, before you go, let me just remind folks that the full traffic study is up on the town website that Jeffrey and his team did. And it is quite lengthy with a lot of data for those of you that are kind of data junkies, all of it's available, and certainly you're welcome to send along any questions once you review the full report. But tonight will be just the 15-minute version.
Sure, thanks for that introduction. So just by way of a high-level overview, as anyone who gets a chance to go through the document, the first thing your peer reviewer is going to do is check this kind of first element, which is, the document has to comply with state standards and industry standards. That's the first thing your peer reviewer is going to do. There is a series of standards we have to follow in preparing that study. I certified by virtue of my PE stamp that the document's been prepared in accordance with those standards. Which your peer reviewer will also verify that itself. The project at 40 units multifamily is not a significant traffic generator. It's going to generate somewhere between 35 to 40 peak hour trips. Concentrated where the access is to the site. As you get further away from the site, the numbers get smaller. And so what we found in terms of impacts that we're speaking of are changes in delays and residual vehicle queuing. So if you have delay at an intersection, then there tends to be a backup. So we look at what the delay is before and after the project's traffic is added, and then we look at how many cars are backed up at any specific intersection that we evaluate. The conclusion in looking at that before and after the project's traffic is added, delays before, delays after, was the project didn't cause any significant changes and increases in delays. The delays went up by no more than 1 second. And then the residual vehicle queuing, what you'd find is if there were 2 cars backed up at an intersection, you'd still see 2 cars. And the reason for that is that at 35 to 40 peak hour vehicle trips, over the course of an hour, the roads are able to process that level of increased traffic. Exiting the project site, minimal delay, if at all. And minimal negligible queuing. So again, similar to our offsite intersections that we'll speak about in a minute, as we look at the driveway itself. Route 16, the volume of traffic, it's about a little over 9,000, almost 10,000 vehicles per day. It sounds like a large number, but that volume of traffic as it goes by the site, people are able to go exit and enter the site with minimal delay. So that's what we found in terms of our analysis. Most importantly, we didn't find that there were any safety deficiencies. So we looked at motor vehicle crash data. There were no high crash locations and no locations that were on the state's database along Route 16 that were high crash locations. So we're at least starting with a condition that there's no safety deficiencies as it relates to motor vehicle crash history. And then looking at the lines of sight where the project driveway is located, the sight lines with some vegetation clearing that would occur within the project site or in the public right-of-way. The sight lines far exceed what's required for safe operation of the intersection. Measured travel speeds were close to the posted speed limit, which is 45 miles an hour. At 45 miles an hour, you need to have a sight line of 425 feet. The available sight lines with the vegetation clearing I had mentioned exceed 450, 460 feet. So we have far in excess of what's required what's required for safe operation. The actual sight lines exceed 600 feet. So I misspoke there for a minute. So we need to have 425. We have over 600 feet of clear sight lines with some minimal vegetation. So it's far in excess of what's required. So drilling down a little bit on the traffic study itself. So this site just shows the location of the project as it exists along Route 16. So Route 16, lots of vegetation on the slide here. So Route 16 is traveling basically, as you look at the slide, it's basically from the lower left to the upper right on the slide. The site abuts Route 16. You also see that we've called out, there's 4 lots that abut Greenwood Street. We have accounted for those in the traffic analysis. They're not associated with the larger project, which is on lot 5, as you see here. But we did account for single family homes being developed on the 4 lots that front along Greenwood Street. So that's just an important thing to just point out as we did our traffic analysis. We didn't ignore those lots. Those have been reflected in essentially the background developments for the project itself. So this slide shows the study area that was evaluated as a part of the impact assessment. Generally, what you look at is a major intersection on either side of the project site. So the major intersection on either side is Greenwood Street and Woodland Street. Those are the locations where if we start with the project site along 16, some of the traffic turns left, some turns right. it disperses itself, it gets to one of these intersections on either side of the site, and then the numbers kind of drop off. Some of the traffic will come and go from Greenwood Street, some will come and go from Woodland Street. So as you get outside or beyond these two intersections, the numbers generally drop off to, on the order of about 20 vehicles over the course of an hour. So one additional vehicle every 3 minutes. So once you get beyond these two intersections, the impacts of the project would be something that would be basically within the existing traffic stream. You wouldn't notice the additional traffic, so you wouldn't show measurable increases in delays or vehicle queuing. So I had mentioned, just by way of context and looking at the slide here, that Route 16, where the site is located, it accommodates about 9,900 vehicles per day. The peak hour traffic volumes, so when I was mentioning the 35 to 40 vehicles on the roadway during the peak traffic volume hours, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. During the peak hours, roughly about 10% of that traffic, so if we have 9,900 vehicles, during the peak hours, so 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening when the traffic volumes are the highest. The roadway accommodates somewhere around 950 vehicles, two-way traffic again during the peak hour. The peak hour in where the site is located in the morning, it occurs between 7 and 8 in the morning. And then in the evening, the peak hour is 4:15 to 5:15 p.m. So that's the peak on the roadway. And we're going to speak in a minute about how much traffic we're going to add to the roadway during those peak time periods. There's no sidewalks as we look at this section of roadway. There's also no bicycle accommodations, although Route 16 is sufficiently wide to have a shared travelway condition, so that you can ride a bike on Route 16, and if there's a motor vehicle traveling, the vehicle, if it passes a bicyclist, does not have to cross the center line. So that's what we mean in terms of it's a shared road type of accommodation. There's no public transportation services, although we did note in our assessment that the Council on Aging does coordinate transportation services for seniors. So that's something that, as we talk about kind of recommendations as it relates to transportation demand management, we want to make sure that if there are seniors in the project site, that they do have the contact information for the Council on Aging. So what we're required to do in our transportation analysis is when we look at the impact of the project, we need to look 7 years in the future. So our traffic study was published in September of 2023. So the 7 years in the future was the year 2030. And that's when we're looking at impacts from the project. We look at traffic volumes and impacts under 2030 conditions with and without the project. So the no-build condition in 2030 is what we call conditions without the project. So in order to establish that no-build condition, there's two components to the no-build. It's just traffic growth, general growth that would occur if the town didn't approve any more projects within the town. Generally, traffic volumes are going to increase just by virtue of, as I usually explain, if you have someone in your household that is not of driving age that may get their license in that 7-year time period, that may be an added vehicle on the roadway that's not there today. So that's generally what traffic growth, it represents those type of situations. General traffic growth in the area or within the town has generally been close to about 1%. However, historically, in the other transportation assessments that have been conducted in the town have used a 1.5% growth rate. So it's higher than what his historic growth has been. So we use that 1.5% growth. That's consistent with the other studies we performed in the town and that your peer reviewers also looked at. So we've maintained that growth rate at 1.5% per year. The other component of the future condition is projects in the area. I've appeared before this board for multiple projects. So there's several residential projects in the area that we know of. We work with the planning department to just get the information from all of those studies. Again, many of those we prepared. The 5 projects in aggregate are about 300 residential units. And I know the board's very familiar with all those projects, but we've included each of those projects in a net of 300 residential units and the traffic that those 300 residential units would have produced. There was one commercial project. It's not in this area. It's the relocation of the Dunkin' Donuts on Route 27. We did account for that as well in terms of any residual traffic it may add in this area. So again, 5 residential projects that in total encompassed about a little over 300 residential units, and then the relocation of the Dunkin' Donuts on Route 27. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we did include 4 single-family homes being constructed along Greenwood Street and the associated traffic with those that would be added. So that's been also built into the no build condition. So again, no build conditions, 1.5% per year growth rate, compounded annually for 7 years, 5 residential projects with just over 300 residential units being added, and then the Dunkin' Donuts relocation on Route 27, and then the 4 single-family homes on Greenwood Street. So that's our no build condition or no build traffic volumes. The next thing we do is we look at the traffic from the project, and that's what's shown in the slide here. So what you see in the far right-hand column is the total traffic produced by the project. So over a 24-hour basis, we're predicting the project would generate 332 vehicle trips. It's half in, half out. So that's what you see entering 166, exiting 166. That 332 vehicle trip number, that's what gets added to the 9,900 vehicles that are on Route 16. So if you want to look at a percent increase or what the increase would be on Route 16, it's the 332 gets added to 9,900 vehicles. So you can see it's a relatively small increase. The next two numbers are the amount of traffic that's produced during each of those weekday peak hours. So during the weekday morning peak hour, so again, 7 to 8 in the morning, when the traffic on Route 16 is at its highest level, we're going to add 35 vehicles to about 950 vehicles that are on Route 16. And then during the evening peak hour, so this is your 4:15 to 5:15 in the evening, when we have, again, somewhere around 950 vehicles on Route 16, the project's going to add 38 vehicles on top of the 950 vehicles that are out there. So that's the traffic produced by the project. And then I had skipped ahead when we were talking or looking at this figure. This is the distribution of traffic. So as the 35 vehicles in the morning, 38 vehicles in the evening get added out onto Route 16, this is how it disperses itself onto the roadway network. The way we come up with this trip distribution pattern or the dispersal pattern, we look at US Census data for the town of Sherborn. As you report where you live on your census form, you also report where you work. And so we're able to look at if for a resident of the town of Sherborn, where do they work? And then understanding the employment centers, then we can look at the location of the project and how from the project location, how do you get to those employment centers? And that allows us to come up with what you see here for the distribution pattern for those project generated trips. We also look at the existing traffic patterns, so that if there's some local influence that causes people to choose a specific roadway, because let's say there's congestion at certain intersections, and so people know local routes and how to avoid some of those congested areas, that shows up in the traffic counts that we perform. And we also look at refining the census distribution based on the actual traffic counts at intersections. So we do a little bit of refinement based on that. But in general, looking at this, what you see is about 79% of the traffic is oriented to and from the northeast of the project site along Route 16. 21% is to and from the southwest. As you get to Greenwood Street, that 79%, about 3% peels off and uses Greenwood Street. To the south of the site, the 21%, 1% of that peels off on Woodland Street. So what you see as you get beyond the project site, as we talked about, the 35 vehicles in the morning, 38 vehicles in the evening. When it gets out to each of these major intersections, the numbers drop off because the 3% ends up on Greenwood Street, another 1% on Woodland Street. The bulk of it's on Route 16, but you can see how the numbers get smaller and smaller as you get away from the project site. So as we looked at this distribution pattern and then assessed impacts, delays, and queuing at these intersections, again, what we found was that there wasn't any changes in levels of service. So usually what you hear is us presenting letter grades A through F, with A being the best operating conditions, F considered failing, and E is a movement or an intersection that's at its design capacity. A D letter grade is considered the limit of acceptable traffic operation. So we generally want to be D or better in terms of operating conditions. A D is generally delays of about 35 seconds. If you're waiting at an intersection. So if I come up Greenwood Street, I stop at the stop sign. If I wait about 35 to 40 seconds, that's a D in terms of letter grades. All of the movements at these intersections under existing, no build, and build, they were all D or better. The movements along Route 16 are level of service A, so there is superior operating conditions. As we looked at those letter grades before and after the project's traffic, there was no changes in the letter grades. So all movements were D or better at these intersections. And again, if you looked at the delays, they didn't go up by more than 1 second during the peak time period. So low traffic generation from the project as we added to the roadway network, no safety deficiencies, no operational deficiencies, and the impact of the project was generally about a second increase in delay and didn't see any change in terms of vehicle queuing. So as we focused on our recommendations for the project, we have 2 sets of recommendations. The first is as it relates to the design of the project itself, and then the second set is to really, to the extent we can, encourage people to use alternative modes of transportation. So this first set of recommendations deal with the site plan itself, and these are reflected on the site plan. So we know that the driveway is going to be 22 feet in width. In fact, I believe, and Bob can speak to this in a minute, the fire chief had requested the 22 feet. That's reflected in the site plan. It's reflected in the turning analyses that we've done for the fire truck. So we've demonstrated the fire truck can get in, circulate within the site, and then exit with the 22 feet in width. So that's what's proposed for the driveway. Within the project site where we have parking in place, the driveway, the aisle behind the parking is 24 feet. 23 feet is the minimum that's required for vehicle maneuvering to get in and out of the parking spaces. So the site plan reflects something that's in excess of that. Exiting the project site, we have a stop sign. All signs and pavement markings within the site will be consistent with state standards, which is in manual and uniform traffic control devices. We do have a sidewalk along one side of the driveway that will extend out to Route 16. And so this is where the bus will pick up on Route 16. So we want to make sure that there's a ability for children to walk out to Route 16, have a safe place to wait, and then the bus will pick them up at that location. Signs will be placed outside of the site triangle areas. So those will be shown on the site plan so that we don't have any blockage of those sight lines. I had mentioned the fact that within the site triangle areas, we do want some vegetation trimming to take place, and that will occur again within the site or the public right of way. And it won't be nothing on private property. So it's all things that we can control and do within our property or within the town right of way with appropriate permits. The last thing as it relates to sight lines, no signs, but also wanting to make sure that there's no snow piles placed in that area there, that those be removed as well. So the last set of recommendations, and hopefully I'm sure I've gone past the 15 minutes, but this is just really quick. We don't have public transportation services at this time at the project site, but it is important that residents understand where the closest public transportation services are. Most importantly, that they do, if you're a senior and you live within the project site, that you have the contact information for the Council on Aging, who will arrange transportation services for seniors. Also, bicycle accommodations, so we have bike racks and weather protected bicycle parking as well within the project site. That is the last slide, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, Bob, are you going to transition now to the public water supply?
Sure, Jonathan, I saw there was at least one hand up, and we'd be happy to take any questions from the public if you desire.
I didn't see the hand, I'm sorry.
It was James's iPad is what I saw.
Okay. James, do you have a question for Mr. Dirk?
Yeah, hi, Jim Cole, 134 Washington Street. A couple questions related. You did mention the bus. I think VHB is a good firm, but I did want to ask about the bus stop and then on the return and the crosswalk. And there's also something related to using the environment across the street from Washington Street and the entrance to this project, and how people are going to transit across Washington Street to go take a walk, because there is nothing on this project as far as trails and things of that nature. At least they're very limited if they want to go into the woods across the street. Is that going to impact traffic, and have you taken that into consideration? Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you for the comments. Bob, are we providing walking trails?
James, I'm not sure I understood what you said. I assume that you're aware of the Bailey Trail, which comes across this property from Greenwood over to it exits off the property at Route Washington Street or Route 16,
Right. No, I'm-
fairly close to Old
I'm,
Orchard.
I'm very aware. I'm talking about
Yeah.
the other side of Washington Street where there is a whole depth of trail system that people would
Yeah.
like to access.
Sure. So are you asking me, would we put in a crosswalk there? Because obviously we're not allowed to put crosswalks
Well,
down.
how are people going to go at their own risk to go use those trails
Well,
and
I
cross
certainly
Washington
would.
Street?
Yeah, I certainly would hope, James, that we would work with the town. And I don't know if Jeremy wants to weigh in, but it seems obvious if we have a community there, that we would want to put a crosswalk somewhere nearby to get over to those trails. I completely agree with you, but obviously I don't control that. I would have to work with the town to
Yeah,
make
I'm
that.
just bringing it up in the context of
No,
VHB's
great.
traffic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think if that can, if the town lets us know where the desire line is for that, we can absolutely take a look at it and see. The key thing is as you probably know, is to make sure we've got good sight lines, and then we could put together an appropriate plan for that to take place. Not uncommon that's a request, so we can certainly look at that, and that's a very good comment. Thank you.
Yeah, we have two other questions. I think Rafe Lehman was next in the queue.
It was really just a follow-up. So thanks. But I guess the question is, how would that impact traffic if you've got people crossing there and crosswalks and lights? Is that part of the traffic study, or is that just sort of something you then add on to just facilitate the use without understanding the impact on traffic and delays?
So it really wouldn't impact, the impact on delays would only be as if we had some kind of a device to control the traffic, which we would not, the number of crossings we're talking about wouldn't rise to the level where we would actually have like a red light to stop traffic. However, we probably would look at those flashing yellow lights, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon or something like that. Just given the fact that, I didn't get into a lot of detail, but the speed of traffic out there, I'm sure you're very well aware is it's at least, it's 45 miles an hour. So when we have a crossing at 45 miles an hour, we would want to have some type of at least the flashing yellow lights out there so that as you cross, it's going to let motorists know that someone's crossing the road. So high visibility pavement markings, signs, and then the rectangular rapid flashing beacon is what we would put in. It's not something that's going to affect it. It won't affect the flow of traffic. When you push the push button, people are going to stop. They're going to know to stop and do that. Pedestrian would cross, traffic would then move along. It wouldn't occur in as much of a frequent basis or at a frequent basis enough to really cause significant backups that would occur constantly along the road itself. But the key thing really, it's not so much the backup, it's making sure we have a safe crossing.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question or comment from Julie Safai. I'm not sure I've pronounced your last name correctly.
Hi, it's her husband, David Safai, 63 Greenwood Street. Thank you all for this evening. More of a nit, and I'm curious as for completion purposes why the analysis of dispersal did not include Old Orchard or Page Farm in that diagram and as far as statistics.
So more than, I think the reason for that is just that the traffic numbers, once we got beyond that, the numbers get relatively small beyond that point. I mean, we can certainly take it out further and say, how much traffic would be on a specific roadway. So if that's something that's of interest, and it comes our way by way of a comment or through the peer reviewer or however, we can certainly provide that information. It's just generally, as I had mentioned, once we go beyond kind of this study area that we looked at, the numbers get relatively small. Most of the traffic is going to stay on Route 16, but we can certainly, to the extent that there's a desire to say how much traffic is on the roads you had mentioned, we can certainly provide that information.
Yeah, I just bring that up because those are the roads that run directly into that area. And I'm sure there are people on this line who are sensitive to that.
Yep.
Sure.
No, we can
No,
certainly provide that.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just ask my fellow board members if they have a question for Mr. Dirk before we move along. Todd?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Rick, I'm not sure you're still tuned in.
I am still tuned in. Thank you for the thought, though, about my cognitive powers.
No questions at this time.
Okay. Okay, Bob, if you could then move along now to the public water supply, 15 minutes.
Sure. So I'm going to introduce Steve Smith, who is known over the years around town in the public water supply world, and actually in the private water supply world. He worked with us. I guess it was now 8 years ago at developing the wells at Abbey Road. And he's done some other work around town as well. His firm is called Hydrocycle. And Steve, so are you going to share your screen tonight? And Steve's going to tell us mostly about what a water supply is and, you know, the process that we're going to go through to develop it. So.
Okay, very good. Steve, you've got to unmute, sir.
Now you should be able to hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Now, sharing the screen. Right out. Okay, I'm going to talk about public water supply wells and how they work into Washington Street, Sherborn homes. For the record, my name is Stephen Smith. I'm a groundwater hydrologist. I have 46 years experience, only 8 years in Sherborn, but quite a few other years working in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Washington Street project would involve 4 public wells. And public wells simply are just wells that provide water, they're permitted, provide water to a group of people. And as this figure shows, there are 2 zones around the public wells. The zone 1, which is a critical area that provides water to the wells. So it's protected by state regulations very strongly. No other development goes in that area. No chemical storage, no gasoline storage. These wells are really protected very high by this zone 1. And the zone 1 has to be fully encompassed by the property. The zone 1 can't extend beyond the property boundaries. Outside the zone 1, there's a interim wellhead protection area that serves as a backup to the zone 1 under drier conditions when the wells might search beyond the zone 1 for water into this wellhead protection area. And it has, it just provides that kind of second level of protection. So as I said, a public well basically is a well that provides water to a group of people. And in the Commonwealth, that group can be 25 individuals that gets water for at least 60 days of the year. And that certainly includes a residential development such as the Sherborn, the Washington Street Sherborn homes. Public wells are divided into 2 groups, basically greater than 100,000 gallons a day and less than 100,000 gallons a day for smaller wells, such as the Washington Street wells. We're looking at basically 7,700 gallons per day for those wells. And for each of the wells, that would be 1,925 gallons per day, or only 1.34 gallons per minute over a 24-hour period. Basically what a public well is. There's a permitting process that the state goes through to permit public wells of this size. It's a lot more complex for the larger public wells, but for smaller public wells, you can really break it down into 2 steps. And the first step is basically explaining to the state in paper what the overall project is, what's the zoning and land use for the area, and existing and potential sources of contamination, what are the environmentally sensitive areas, and how we're going to test the well. We're required to do a pump test for all four wells and sample the wells during the test and at the end of the test to get an idea of what the water quality is. And all of this information is submitted in a report to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Their goal is to look that over and see if it basically passes at least the paper test to see that it could be a possible small public supply well. If it passes that, they'll approve it and we'll be allowed to go on to the second step, which basically includes installing the wells, drilling the wells, installing pumps in the wells, and conducting a pump test, which would probably go on for 2 days. And during that time, you monitor groundwater levels in the wells, you sample the wells midway and at the end of the test. And all of this is put into a document, an application to the state, requesting that the wells be made small public supply wells. Little detail on the pump test. This is a bedrock well that I tested probably about 10 years ago. The well discharge, this is the electric supply going into the well. This is the water outlet from the well. It goes through a pressure reducer, pressure gauge here, through a reducer to basically a water meter that tells you how many gallons are being pumped. This is a sampling port where the water sample is taken. And basically the discharge goes off and about 300 feet from the well. How was a bedrock well constructed? Well, the first part of the well is to basically drill through the overburden, drill through the soil down about a minimum of 15 feet into bedrock. At that point, a steel casing is set down into rock that goes from the bottom of that 15-foot hole up to the surface. And at that point, we're ready to grout the well. If we, this is a bedrock well drilling rig, and it basically has the capability to drill up to 2,000 feet into bedrock. Most wells are, less than 1,000 feet, and for some of these wells, it's hard to say. I think wells in that area generally have been in the 300 to 600 foot range. Once the casing is in place, a cement grout mixture is injected into the well casing where it rises up. And the idea is the grout cement is meant to form a seal between the soil and the steel casing. And then the purpose of the seal is to prevent contaminated water, surface water, from flowing down along the casing and contaminating the well. It's a very important part of the well construction and something that's looked at very carefully. The next figure shows a well just prior to being grouted. You can see this is the 8-inch casing, and they're mixing some grout over in here. The grout will actually be mixed in here and then pumped using this pump up and down into the casing, and that's basically how a well is grouted. A public water supply well is grouted. The last step is the installation of a pump. And the pump basically is going to bring the water to the surface. Very important component. This is a picture of a submersible pump. This lower portion is the motor. The upper portion is the pump. And this casing serves two purposes. It's the discharge line from the pump, but it's also the device that supports the pump as it's lowered into the well to whatever depth, 300, 600, 900 feet. For this particular well, we were going down about 350 feet. And as this is lowered into the well, these pipes that are laying on the ground are connected on, they're 13-foot lengths, and they're connected onto this pipe as it's lowered down into the well. The wires that come from the pump are connected to this spool, and the wire is basically taped to the support pole pipe as it's lowered down in sequence. How was the system operated? We've got we've been successful. We have a permit, and the system is being operated. Well, one thing that has to happen is that a water company has to be created for a public well. And all 4 wells will be part of that company. And the company basically is set up to operate the wells, provide budgets, maintenance for them, water sampling, backup plans, and just regular operation of the wells. And it all has to be documented and submitted to the state for their approval. A typical sampling of a public well of this size would probably be on a quarterly basis. And you sample for general chemicals, some volatile organics, some secondary chemicals, indicator chemicals, and likely PFAS, because it's become such a ubiquitous contaminant in our world. So that's basically a summary of small public wells that we're looking to do for the Washington Street Sherborn Homes project. And I'm available for any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Let me just start and ask my fellow board members if they have any questions. Todd, any question?
No, no questions at this time.
Okay, Rick, do you have any questions?
I saw that Rick had dropped off. He might be
Okay.
transferring from his phone to his computer.
Okay,
Jonathan, I can just throw in a couple of points here that I would ask if I were a resident. So one thing that's important to understand is these wells are very, very similar to the wells that all of us have on our own properties. The only real difference that I'm aware of in terms of how they're constructed is, and Steve will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, is that these are 8-inch casings. So they're 8-inch diameter wells, as opposed to most of us have 6-inch diameter wells. So it's a little bigger casing. Is that right, Steve?
I'll correct you on that. These are
Okay,
probably
please.
still, the 8-inch casing basically is the protective casing that goes through basically the overburden and down only 15 feet into the rock.
Yep.
From there, it's likely that these are going to be 6-inch diameter holes. So as far as the difference between, any of the private wells in Sherborn, these wells will be very similar.
Mhm. Yeah. The other thing
Mr. Smith, excuse me, Mr. Smith, can I ask you to stop sharing your screen, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
And the only other thing I was going to point out is what's at the end of that slide we were just looking at, which is that almost always, and this is true with the town of Sherborn's public water supplies and with other public water supplies in our town, you hire a company. There's a company called Whitewater who does the work for, I believe, all of the town public water supplies. But a company like Whitewater, who really is very good at kind of managing the regulatory aspects, the testing aspects, the emergency response aspects of the public water supply. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that people understood that that's how they're run. They're really not run by kind of a property manager. They're run by a professional kind of water folks.
Jonathan?
Yes, Rick.
I had to step out for a minute to put on something a little bit warmer. I wore a mere sport coat up to my office, and it's chilly enough here that I had to get a sweater. But it sounds like you had a question for me, and I missed part of it. So
No, my only question was, did you have a question?
oh no, not at this time.
Okay, very good. Well, do any of the members of the public have a question about the public water supply for Mr. Smith? Okay, I think
Jonathan, there are a couple of hands up, Brian Moore.
I
and-
see the hands, Bob. I see
Oh,
them.
okay, okay. Yeah.
All right. So let me start with Brian Moore. I'm not sure who was first, but Mr. Moore, if you briefly have some questions.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. The cumulative area, the zone ones for the wells, probably Mr. Smith should answer this. What's the total square footage of the zone ones when you combine them all together?
Brian, I haven't calculated that yet.
Okay, well,
I
given
could
the
look that up and then get back to you on it.
No, that's okay. Just given the precipitation, I think it's important to note that, you know, it would require a couple of acres of space. And when the wells are put close together, just simply based on precipitation rates in the town of Sherborn, about 4 feet a year, that those wells should be placed not too close together so that they don't deplete the actual resource that all the neighbors are relying on for groundwater as well. Because if
Right.
you put all those wells too close together, what happens is their cumulative effective drawdown, you know, sucks up about 93,000 square feet of precipitation area that other neighbors are relying on for their groundwater as well, and replacing it with the septic effluent that's going to be wherever this discharge is for the septic system. So I think that's something that the Zoning Board of Appeals and Board of Health should keep an eye on moving forward. Thank you for letting me comment.
Yeah, one of the things, Brian, I'll just jump in, is that we are looking, now that we have kind of a final layout on the project in the last 3 months, we're looking at possibly modifying the well locations to spread them out a little bit further. But obviously we had to be sensitive to, as you point out, the zone ones that we need to protect. So we kind of needed to see how the place laid out first. And, you know, it's kind of an iterative process. I anticipate that we will be able to move them, and Michael Lesser will be happy about this. I believe we're going to be able to move them further, a couple of them out of the buffer zone, the 100-foot buffer zone altogether. And the other two will be in the outer buffer zone, which is better than we've shown on this plan. Also, I believe we'll be able to increase the minimum distance between our wells by about 50%. So we're thinking about what you're saying, and trying to optimize the project from that perspective.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Meredith
Just a quick
Wesolowski.
question. 34 Greenwood Street, Meredith Wesolowski. Would the results of the suspected quarterly testing be publicly available?
Yes, they would, absolutely, on the state website. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Jack Mulhall.
Yeah, Jack Mulhall, 48 Greenwood Street. It showed on the map the interim wellhead area. It circles around and appears to go up onto private property, other properties. Is this a concern, and what kind of protection is offered within that? And then a follow-up question. The second question is, what kind of treatment do you anticipate the water having to go through to be supplied to the residents?
So Steve, let me jump in, and then you again correct me. The first is the zone 1 is where you're not allowed to build, Jack, as you may or may not know. And then the interim is kind of broader, and that land is allowed to be owned by other folks, but you just want to be thinking about what's going on in that larger circle. And then, sorry, your second question?
Was what kind of treatment do you anticipate needing?
Yeah. So we won't know that obviously until we dig the well and test the water. You know, much like at Woodhaven, if you dig it at, they dug the well at Woodhaven and it had higher levels of manganese back in the day. And so therefore they treat to take out the manganese at Woodhaven.
Is,
You know, we have to test our water before we know how to treat it.
right, is there a concern for the salting of the highway of Route 16?
I absolutely, yes. I am a little bit of a student of the water supplies in town, both private and public, because of what I do for a living at the moment. And I think that, and no, you know, I'm not dumping on Sean here tonight, but clearly de-icing is a problem for our wells. And if you look at places like the Pilgrim Church, they have unbelievably high sodium and chloride levels. And guess what? That well is fairly close to, you know, the road. So I absolutely have concerns about that. But that's a concern, frankly, all over a rural town. So
Yeah, and will be
thank you for
determined
the question. though.
once you do the
Thank you.
testing. Good, thank you.
We have
Absolutely.
another question or comment from Tia Wallach.
Yeah, I think Marion's hand was up first, but happy to. her go.
I'm sorry, I didn't notice that.
Go
Uh,
ahead, Tia, I'll go next.
Okay.
Thank you. My question actually does kind of stem from something that Jack asked. So you have, I don't know the name of these zones, but you have the 100-foot zone that you can't build within, and then you have the broader one that you can build within, and that overlaps with other people's properties. And so well, let me ask my question. You can tell me what I got wrong. So on that bigger circle is what I'll call it, the big circle. It looks like there's other properties that overlaps with. And what I didn't see on that graphic was the location of those other properties' wells and where their big and little circles are. Is that something that we will get information on?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Tia. So the first thing I wanted to correct is that zone 1 that you're talking about, which is kind of what I call the no build or the no touch area. You know, it's the first circle is, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, that's approximately 150-foot radius. Am I right about that?
Yeah, sure.
145-ish or something.
I think it's about 143.
Yeah, about 143. And with regard to the interim, which is the larger circle, I'm going to let Steve answer kind of what that's for in just a second, but I'll finish. You're asking, do we know where all the other wells are in relation to our wells and to our septic, of course. And I haven't measured well to well, but in some ways those numbers are generally bigger. But our septic to the nearest well over across Route 16 is just under 400 feet. And from our wells, it would be substantially more than that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm going to guess more than 500 feet. The closest neighboring wells to this public water supply will be to the property that I hope to develop the single-family homes on Greenwood Street. Those would be the closest wells to the public water supply. You know, I think the Weslowski's well probably is going to be 600 feet, but don't hold me to it. I'd need to really go and measure it out. But that's the order of magnitude to the neighbors' wells. And Steve, why don't you maybe spend a minute on that bigger circle?
Well, the interim wellhead protection area, as I said, is that secondary area around the zone 1 it provides another level of protection. You look in that area to see that, you know, you don't have a hazardous waste site there. You don't have, you know, a large chemical storage area there. You don't have any sort of business that would deal with things that would be a risk if spilled on the property. And they're all residential. It's, you know, sure, there's Route 16, but, you know, you'd have to have a major accident there to cause problems. So it's, in this case, you know, the IWPA covers an area of low risk to the well. So that basically is the purpose for an IWPA. It just provides an area that the state will look at for the more risky sort of land uses.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Oh, Mary Ann, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I
Please.
have another just informational question from Mr. Smith. By the way, that was a really, really nice presentation, very clear, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the DEP procedure for the 48-hour pump test that you have to do, they have their rules set quite strictly, and I know you'll follow them. But I'm wondering if you plan to monitor any neighboring wells, just given the fact that this is drawing out quite a lot of water from a depth that we don't know, and given the fact that none of us know where those crevices are down in the bedrock that we're taking water from or how they're connected. I'm wondering if there's a plan to monitor neighboring wells before and after that 48-hour pump test or during. That is to monitor the watering levels by sonar or transducer or whatever you decide to use.
So I think, Marion, the answer to the question of what we're going to need to do will be informed by two things. One, certainly by what the Mass DEP requires for a public water supply. Obviously, we'll be compliant with that. And secondly, we'll need to be compliant with whatever conditions are put on the project by the ZBA in terms of testing. We expect that we'll be treated the same as a market rate project in town. But other than that, I think that's how those questions will be answered. Unless Steve tells me that, Steve, is it a requirement of a public water supply that neighbors' wells 400, 500 feet away be monitored in the testing, or is that not a requirement of the public water supply?
It's not a requirement.
Yep.
No, I recognize.
Does that answer your question, Marion?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Daryl Beardsley, you had your hand up. You still have a question?
I had the same comment as Marion, basically.
Okay.
About the testing.
Okay,
And
Mr.
it
Chairman,
is
you've got
often
your hand up.
required. Okay.
So, Mr. Acting Chair, my name is Rick Novak. I live at 36 Nason Hill Road, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I only wanted to point out on the issue of these wells that we have had a similar situation over at the 41 North Main Street and 27 Hunting Lane project, where there was a lot of animated discussion of testing of neighboring wells when that was being pumped. I think those might have been higher draw levels, and so it's not necessarily apples to apples, but it's not without precedent. It's just something to look at in terms of what's appropriate and fair.
As I said, Rick, we're open to, hearing from the ZBA, of course.
Okay, very good. Does anybody else here at the meeting have a question or a comment they would like to make? Seeing none. Okay, Mr. Murchison, you're the applicant. Do you have any other plans for the time we've set aside for you?
So, I'd be happy to take any questions on any topics about the project at this point. As I said, I didn't think it was a good use of everyone's time to dive into the septic or the stormwater without having heard from the peer reviewer. I think it would make sense to put that off until next time, but I'm happy to answer any basic questions that people have. I would say that we did get a comment letter back from the Board of Health yesterday, and we are actively kind of working on answering the questions that were provided to us. But like I said, I think the peer reviewer is a big deal for the project, obviously, for all of us. It's a good independent review of our engineering, and we look forward to that. And they're not going to come and say it's perfect in the first go around. That's not the way it works. But we're happy to work with them to get it to where everyone is happy with the engineering.
Okay, very good. Rick, you've got your hand up.
I do. I have to remember how to put it down again. There we go. I'm going to ask a question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer to, Bob, but just to ask it. Obviously, the project eligibility letter for Greenwood talked about cumulative impacts. And would I presume correctly that when you get to presenting on stormwater and septic here for this project, you'll talk about those cumulative impacts at that time?
Well, I might have to defer to my counsel to comment on this, but
Okay.
my immediate reaction as a layperson is you denied the project. So I'm not sure. Rick, I mean, Paul, could you weigh in here?
Yeah. Bob, I mean, I think from our perspective, we're going to presume that we'll be filing an appeal of that project and that we will prevail on it. So I do think that it would be wise to provide, the evidence requested that shows the cumulative effect of both projects.
Sure, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
That was the answer I expected. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
Daryl, you've got your hand up briefly.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to mention that I guess more soil testing is planned. So the Board of Health has received an application for the health agent to observe some more subsurface investigation at the property. And as Bob mentioned, Mark Oram provided a letter of Title V deficiencies for the plans as they are now, nothing that shouldn't be readily available. Be added to them. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, the additional testing goes into the category for me of you can never have too much information.
Okay. Rick, I'm going to pass the baton to you to draw us to a conclusion here.
Okay. If there are no other well, first of all, John, thank you very much for stepping in. You did a fabulous job. You're inspiring me to book one-way tickets to Venezuela or somewhere and not come back. So thank you for that.
You're quite welcome.
Bob, I think we need to talk about the next. This means you have to come back from Snowmass. Bob, it sounds like maybe picking a next date would be smart, and would that
Sure.
maybe hinge on
Please.
the peer reviewer? Is Steve Booley or anybody on from the peer reviewer today?
No.
Okay, and Bob, I know you've had a good relationship with the peer reviewer. There's been some good communication back and forth. Do you have a sense of when he's likely to be able to give us some?
I know they've cashed my check, Rick.
That's not quite the same, is it?
Yeah, we cashed your check.
That's a good point by you, Jeannie. Thank you.
Also
So
not the
anyway,
same.
it's the contract is all well in place and we've paid, and there shouldn't be anything in their way. I certainly have not talked to Steve about schedule. Jeannie, have you talked to Steve about schedule at all?
I have not, but I can send him an email tomorrow and
Sure.
we can and have him be ready. I'll tell him when the next meeting is, and I'm sure they'll be ready by then.
Yeah, Rick, what I would, respectfully throw out there is when is school vacation week? Because I know those of you with younger folks care about that. Isn't
The
school
week of the
vacation?
15th.
Yeah.
So that's like 3 weeks from now. Should we do it right after that?
Right after that is the 23rd, which is the 23rd or the 24th town meeting. We just did this dance
23rd.
for
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Well,
And
we
we
could
set-
try to do it before, but I'm a little concerned about whether Steve will be back and then, DGT, our engineers will have time to.
Yeah. And Jeannie, refresh my recollection. When did we next set Farm Road for?
Farm
24th?
Road is, I think it's the 24th.
That's the day after
Right,
town meeting.
Right, and town meeting is the 23rd and maybe the
Sure.
25th if we need it, if I recall, right?
It's probably doubtful for the 25th. I mean, for another town meeting.
But if we do have a continued town meeting, it's gonna be hard to get a quorum together to be able to further
Right.
continue.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I'd certainly, Rick, be willing to say that if town meeting goes over, we can, just do 2 minutes and continue. That would be all right.
We'd have to know where we were gonna do it. All right, let's pick the 25th, subject to town council telling me there's some reason, mechanical type procedural reason why we can't use that. But Jeannie, you think based on the crystal ball that you see, we're unlikely to have town meeting go over?
Yes,
Jeff Waldron's nodding, so, okay, good.
there's only 15 articles,
15
so
15 articles and a consent agenda of probably
Right.
7 or 8 combined.
it'll be
All right,
quick.
I'm taking both of you as personally guaranteeing that we'll have no problem.
Great.
All right.
We're all en route to Snowmass also.
Well,
All right.
spring conditions are
about-
on the way. You better hurry.
I hereby move that we continue the hearing for Washington Street Homes to Thursday night, April 25th, 2024, 7 p.m. That's my motion.
I second that motion.
All right. Any further discussion? All right. And I'd take your second to also be a friendly amendment that we immediately after we extend, we adjourn.
Yes, I endorse
Okay.
that amendment as well.
All right. I don't expect a lot of vigorous debate. Okay. Any further debate? Any further discussion, gentlemen? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye. We'll do it by roll call. Novak votes aye.
Fitch, aye.
Labby, aye.
All right. Thank you all very much. Have a great
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you.
You as well.
See you next
Night.
time.